Hello and welcome to another update. In this one, I'll be covering the latest developments throughout the front line. With the reports being in the direction of Donetsk, we see that the Ukrainian forces managed to advance here slightly in the direction of the southeast of Pobeda, northeast of Novomikhailivka. So the Ukrainian forces here managed to push the Russian forces back from a position they captured a couple of months back from the Ukrainian forces. So there's a bit of back and forth here. The area here with the forest lines includes some fortifications, so that is what is being fought over right now. There's also some fortifications here to the northwest, which the Ukrainian forces are in control of after they captured it a couple of months back. So we've seen some fighting here in this direction. At the same time, we see that the Russian forces managed to push the Ukrainian forces back slightly in the direction of Uroshaine, where they managed to recapture some of the positions they lost a couple of weeks ago. And with this, we see that they are pressuring the Ukrainian forces here to the east of Uroshaine, where the Ukrainian forces had for weeks attempted to push the Russian forces back from their fortifications here in this area. So the Russian forces are continuing their pressure on the Ukrainian side here by the Romovsky Ledge area. As for the Robotic direction, we see here that the Ukrainians managed to advance slightly here to the southwest of Novobrokovka. So we see here that the Ukrainian forces are advancing through the highway. And this is interesting because this is an area where they had essentially not been pushing for a long time. And now they're spreading out their front even further from what we're currently seeing. So rather than a smaller front, they are increasing the size of it. So there are some developments in this direction, and fighting continues to the south of Robotic, with the Russian forces continuing their counterattack in that direction. And then I've updated the positions map mode to include some more fortifications and less otherwhere. So I've added the fortifications in this direction between the Dnieper River and Verbove. Not just the first line, but adding some of the trenches on the second level as well, between the Dnieper River, Topmac, and so on. So we see that the Ukrainian forces in the area they're currently attacking in the direction of Verbove. If they manage to capture Verbove, they're still surrounded by trenches on the Russian side. They have the trench here, which is a 1.5 defense, and then there is another, which also includes anti-tank ditches and trenches. This is besides the point that the village of Ocheretuvate, as well as Tokmak and Polehi, all have fortifications surrounding the villages. Taking a look at the map of Deep State map, we see that in the direction of Tokmak, there's also anti-tank ditches and trenches in the northern direction. So we have the main line of defense, which has anti-tank ditches and trenches. Then we have the second line, which again has anti-tank ditches and trenches, and then the third line around Tokmak, which also has anti-tank ditches and trenches. So exaggerating and saying that most of the Russian defenses is in the first line is false, because every single line has exact same fortifications, and there's also minefields, huge swaths of kilometers of minefields between each line. So the fact that the Ukrainians believe that once they capture the first main line of defense, everything else will fall like a cart house is exactly like the German invasion of the Soviet Union, where it was quoted to say the Soviet Union is a rotten structure, you just need to kick in the door and the whole thing will come falling down. That is what the Ukrainians are currently believing, as history repeats itself when it comes to Russia and their defenses. But with this information of the Ukrainians not even breaking through the first line of defense after 4 months of fighting, to believe that they will be able to break through line 1.5, 2.0, and 3.0 all in one go is very, very difficult to believe is possible at all. So most likely the Ukrainian forces are unable to even break through the first line of defense, but if they're able to, then they will have to face yet another line of trenches and even more anti-tank ditches, mines, and trenches here to the south of those positions. So the Ukrainian forces are now facing, and what they have been facing for a long time, a huge Russian defensive position, and they have so far been able to tickle the starts of it, yet not managed to do any real damage on the Russian forces. And this is after 4 months of fighting and heaps of Western equipment destroyed in these graveyards we've seen throughout the north of Robotic and to the east in the direction of Verbove. The most recent one with the 24 vehicles in the direction of Verbove, and they have yet to break through the defensive line for the Ukrainian forces here in the southern direction. And taking a look at my own map, we see that I've marked 3 different areas as important. It is Topmac and the direction of Oche as well as Polohi. The reason for this is Topmac is well known as the center of the roads and transport between the eastern and western sides here in the Zaporizhia front. The railway goes through Topmac. The Russians are building a second one here between Mariupol and Melitopol. It is a more direct one, but so far it is not complete. This is why Topmac is the main railway between the east and the west, as well as all of these highways going through the area connecting by Topmac. So it is an important logistical hub for the Russian forces. Then we have Ocheretovate. This is important because the Ukrainian push is happening here to the east of Robotic, which means if the Ukrainian forces want to attack Topmac, they have to go through it. And this is also one which has been heavily focused in the defenses, as it is surrounded by these anti-tank ditches and fortifications, and it is clear that they are expecting the fighting from the eastern direction, which is why we're seeing further fortifications in that direction than in the northern one. That is because we have these trenches here to the north, which would essentially force the Ukrainian forces to go through the east, because that is one that makes more sense. You'd rather go fighting through a village of Verbove than fighting in an open field against trenches here to the west of it. So they want to go around it. That is the logical step in this direction. So the Ukrainian forces are planning on going eastwards in the direction of Verbove, trying to capture the village and then push onwards in the eastern direction towards the village, but they have to go through multiple layers of defenses in that process. Then we also have Polohi to the northeast. The reason that is important is because if the Ukrainian forces ever plan to attack in the direction of Polyapole or eastern direction of Novodanilivka, we see that this is the intersection between those two. And comparing this area to the other parts, this has far less fortifications. There's still multiple layers and heavy fortifications everywhere, but it is less than the other direction, which is why I question the idea behind fighting here in this direction. I guess the Ukrainians were expecting to be able to break through at an early stage, and they did admit that it was going slower than they were anticipating already back in July. Now we are in October, and they still haven't managed to break through the first line of defense. So with this, we see that there's a lot of changes that we have to take into account. We also see the fact here that the whole area here is one straight line between Polyapole and Topmac. With this, we see that this is actually the area in which the fighting is taking place, between Oryhiv, Polyapole and Topmac, which is what has been the focus through this whole time. As the area here to the west by Kamyansk, there's a river between the two sides, and then there are fortifications ahead of the first line of defense, and then there's the first line of defense, and then we have another layer, and they have to go around Topmac in this direction. So there's so many demerits to fighting in this direction. So the whole focus is here in the eastern side between Oryhiv, Topmac and Polyapole. Now, moving on to the central part here by Donetsk and Bakhmut, we see that there's a lot of fighting on both sides as the Russian forces are trying to pressure the Ukrainian forces in the southern and central directions, and the Ukrainian forces are pressuring the Russian forces in the central and northern directions, but there's no real activity here. There's mostly just small skirmishes and mainly artillery between the two sides, not a lot of direct fighting. So this is most likely just to draw units of each side to the central part to avoid them reinforcing the other areas of the front. As for the northern side, this is a really weird development as we see that the Russians are continuously bombarding the Ukrainian supply lines, but they aren't really initiating any offensive operations. There are also small skirmishes by Sinkivka, but that is about it. The Russian forces have a lot of units in this section of the front, yet we're not really seeing any operations by the Russian forces here. So this puts to question what is the purpose, what is the plan of the Russian forces. and there's no really clear answer here, as whenever I do an analysis, what I expect them to do, they end up doing nothing. So I'm just going to leave it at that, and that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.